Coming up on this Tuesday edition of Daybreak, China's top negotiator on North Korea's nuclear programs is in Pyongyang in a likely effort to restart multilateral talks to denuclearize North Korea. The United States and the European Union slam Russia's actions in Crimea by imposing sanctions on key individuals. Russian President Vladimir Putin signs a decree recognizing Crimea as a sovereign state. Plus, Korea may have reached the limits of its ability to induce growth in the local economy by solely relying on exports. Experts are calling for red tape to be slashed. Daybreak begins now. Thank you very much for joining us, to all our viewers here in Korea and around the world. It's 6 a.m. on Tuesday, March 18th here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broom and you are watching Daybreak. Our top story this morning, China's top nuclear negotiator has made an unexpected visit to Pyongyang in a likely effort to restart multilateral talks to denuclearize North Korea. The North state-run media on Monday said Wu Dawei, Beijing's chief envoy to the six-party talks, arrived in Pyongyang but did not give further details. Wu's trip follows one by Vice Foreign Minister Liu Zhenmin last month when he discussed resuming the talks with North Korean officials. Seoul, Washington and Tokyo, however, refused to return to talks for talk's sake. They want Pyongyang to show sincerity about giving up its nuclear arms. The North wants an unconditional resumption. Six-party talks involving the two Koreas, the US, China, Japan and Russia, have been stalled since December 2008. Now, South Korea is on a heightened state of readiness following North Korea's recent test firing of dozens of short-range missiles into the East Sea. There are indications the launch pads used for those firings are still on standby. Our Defense Ministry correspondent Kim Hyun-bin reports.
South Korea's defense ministry officials say they think North Korea's missile launches on Sunday were in response to ongoing annual military drills between Seoul and Washington.
North Korea fired off 25 missiles at 3 different times on Sunday. We view this as an armed protest against our joint military exercises with the U.S. North Korea needs to stop its provocations.
Kim said Monday that the ministry is keeping a close eye on the possibility of future provocations, as the launch pad used for the missile launches is currently on standby. Pyongyang did not give any prior notification of Sunday's launches from the North's east coast. The rockets, which were shot into the East Sea, are believed to have a range of 70 kilometers. Experts say it's not unusual for North Korea to test fire missiles, but it is unprecedented for the regime to fire off so many in one day. Officials in Seoul believe the rockets were Soviet-made surface-to-surface frogs, which lack precision but are very powerful.
The precision is low, but the missiles can carry up to 550 kilograms of explosives. It can also deliver chemical weapons capable of destroying a military core.
North Korea has test-fired 6 Scud missiles along with 11 rockets from multiple rocket launchers in the midst of the annual military exercises, which started late last month and will run through mid-April. Seoul and Washington say the drills are purely defensive, but Pyongyang routinely condemns them as a rehearsal for invasion. Those latest rocket launches came just 2 days after Pyongyang threatened to demonstrate its nuclear deterrence. The comments seem to be a firm indication North Korea may be preparing for a 4th nuclear test. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
A special UN Commission on North Korean human rights has urged the international community to join efforts to improve rights conditions in the reclusive state. Reporting to the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva Monday, the panel of inquiry said systematic and widespread crimes of humanity committed by the leadership in Pyongyang must no longer be neglected. The head of the commission, Michael Kirby, compared the situation in North Korea to Nazi Germany, the Khmer Rouge's reign of terror in Cambodia and apartheid South Africa. The commission wants the North Korean case submitted to the International Criminal Court. The North Korean ambassador, So Se-pyong, accused the US and its allies of hostile intentions. before walking out in protest. Now, a day of extremely frantic activity following Crimea's vote Sunday to break away from Ukraine. The United States and European Union have imposed personal sanctions on Russian and Crimean officials involved in what they say was the seizure of Crimea from Ukraine. While the West was doing this, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a decree late Monday recognizing Crimea as a sovereign state. The moves have heightened the most serious East-West crisis since the end of the Cold War. The Crimean parliament has formally asked that Russia admit Crimea as a new subject with the status of a republic. Putin will on Tuesday address a special joint session of Russia's parliament, which could take a decision on annexing the region. US President Barack Obama imposed sanctions on 11 Russians and Ukrainians blamed for the seizure, including toppled Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovich and 2 of Putin's aides.
We start before the sun rises to bring you the latest stories out of Korea. We also lead the way with important global coverage. Stay on the pulse of what is happening with Daybreak.
Korea, which is the world's 12th largest economy, may have reached the limits of its ability to induce growth in the local economy by solely relying on exports. Our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Booming exports were once the golden ticket for the Korean economy. But in recent years, there has been rising speculation that the country's export-driven economy may have reached the limits of its ability to induce growth. Data from the Bank of Korea shows the number of those employed has gradually reduced despite a surge in exports. For every increase in exports worth 1 billion Korean won, or $933,000 in 2011, less than 6 people found new jobs. That's a sharp reduction from 1995, when more than 20 people found new jobs for every increase in exports of the same amount. Many in Korea suggest rather than focusing on exports, there's a need to shift the focus to other areas to bring vitality to the local economy. They suggest lifting heavy regulations in the service sector, which has the highest number of restrictions placed on it. Related officials in the aesthetic surgery industry say excessive regulations are taking a heavy toll on Korea's competitiveness in the field of aesthetic surgery.
There is a growing demand for aesthetic surgery in Korea and from abroad, but investors are getting increasingly more reluctant to invest in R&D to related technologies due to regulations on the industry. This will, in the longer term, would affect the country's competitiveness in the field.
Experts also suggest establishing a K-zone, a free economic zone that would make it easier for Koreans and foreigners to do business. The K-zone will cover an area within a 2,000-kilometer radius, or 3-hour flying distance from a designated area, such as the Incheon International Airport. That would likely include some parts of China, Japan, Mongolia, and Taiwan, and extend to an estimated 1.5 billion people.
The K-Zone is not just a tourist site, it's a business and financial hub that would induce global companies and international organizations to put their headquarters in Korea.
The expert added the government would also need to ease visa restrictions for residents living within the K-Zone, so foreigners could come and go easily. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
And while we're talking about economic news, Korean construction companies' overseas orders are expected to reach a record $72 billion this year. Experts say a decision by local construction companies to work together to win lucrative contracts is a large reason behind the very impressive figure. Hwang Ji-ae reports.
Business is booming for Korean construction contractors in the foreign market. The nation's overseas construction orders have picked up in the first quarter of this year, taking the nation one step closer to a record high in orders. The International Contractors Association of Korea said Monday that construction contracts overseas this year have already topped $16 billion. That's a nearly 70% spike compared to the first quarter of 2013. The association attributes the jump to a decision by local construction companies to build a consortium and win projects together. Take Daewoo Engineering and Construction Corporation, for example. It linked up with 4 other local construction companies, including GS and SK, and won 3 large-scale projects in Kuwait worth more than $7 billion. Industry sources say that bidding on projects along with other local construction companies has become a trend as a means to avoid cutthroat competition. And with Korea's construction companies expected to win more and more contracts from countries in the Middle East this year, the association forecasts that the nation's overseas construction orders will reach $72 billion by the time the year is up. That would surpass the previous record high of $71 billion posted in 2010. Local construction companies say they plan to employ their team strategy in other foreign markets as well, like Latin America and Africa. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Korea performed better than Japan on the trade front last year. The Korea Institute for Industrial Economics and Trade said Monday that Korea logged a record high annual trade surplus of over $44 billion in 2013. Japan, on the other hand, posted a record trade deficit of over $110 billion. This despite the weakening yen. The Institute says the competitiveness of major Korean exports, such as semiconductors, contributed to the record surplus despite the unfavorable exchange rate for Korea. A boycott of Japanese products in China due to a number of territorial and historical disputes also played a role. Now, to realise its vision for a creative economy, the Korean government is putting its money where its mouth is. Roughly $56 million will be injected into what's being called a, quote, creative economy vitamin project this year. It aims to realise sustainable growth and cultivate new business sectors by integrating information technology with existing industries, including agriculture, education and tourism. The Science and ICT Ministry says 23 assignments have been finalised. They include developing a forecasting system to better prepare for natural disasters and upgrading and networking tourist information. And staying here in Korea, and there has been some progress, finally, in the standoff between Korean doctors and the government. Marathon negotiations over the last few days have laid the groundwork for a tentative deal to avoid another strike. Our Kwon So-ah has the details.
A second doctor strike following last week's one-day walkout may have been averted with a tentative agreement reached by the Korean Medical Association and the government. The KMA and the Ministry of Health and Welfare have been in unofficial negotiations since last Friday on the government's plans to reform the medical sector. They reached tentative agreement on a number of issues after marathon talks on Sunday that lasted until midnight and made separate announcements about the talks on Monday. The agreement covers 4 points. The introduction of a telemedicine system that would enable doctors to diagnose and treat patients using remote monitoring and interactive services. The government's plan to let hospitals set up for-profit subsidiaries, reform of the nation's health insurance system, and shorter work hours for medical residents and interns. The KMA and the government agreed to conduct a 6-month trial run of the telemedicine system in order to test its safety and effectiveness. The system was a major issue that sparked the Medical Association's day-long strike last week. They also agreed to gradually shorten the working hours of medical residents and interns who work around 100 hours a week, which is 20 hours more than in the U.S. In addition, the KMA and the government are talking about setting up a committee to tackle other issues such as health insurance reform. Members of the Medical Association will now vote on whether to go ahead with a second 6-day strike slated to start on March 24th, but with the recent agreement, there is a high chance the strike will be cancelled. The association plans to make a decision on the matter in the next 2 or 3 days. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Now, for an update on the search for Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 that disappeared 11 days ago now, we turn to our news centre where our Eunice Kim is standing by.
Good morning, Mark. Not a whole lot to update since yesterday, as Malaysian authorities are still working with dozens of countries to focus their search from what is essentially two vast air corridors, one over Asia as far as Kazakhstan to the north and another over a lot of ocean and part of Indonesia's Sumatra Island to the south. Meanwhile, we did hear from the chief executive of Malaysia Airlines Monday that initial investigations have shown it was the co-pilot, 27-year-old Farik Abdul Hamid, who had given the all right good night sign-off shortly before the plane disappeared. And we're also getting reports this morning that investigators are considering suicide as a possible motive for either the captain or the first officer, of course, among many other possible motives. And we turn to Washington next, where U.S. President Barack Obama called on Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas to take risks for peace, echoing a sentiment expressed to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu 2 weeks earlier. The comments come as a U.S. framework for peace talks appears to have hit a roadblock over the issue of Palestine's recognition of Israel as a Jewish state. Netanyahu has required it, while Abbas has refused it. And during Monday's talks in the Oval Office, Abbas indirectly addressed that sticking point, noting through a translator that Palestinians recognized the state of Israel back in 1993. He also said Israel needs to release a fourth batch of Palestinian prisoners by March 29th under a previous agreement to show its commitment to achieve peace. Now, the U.S. framework for peace faces an April deadline, and with little tangible progress made so far, it is up for an extension. U.S. automaker General Motors has announced another massive recall, this time calling back 1.5 million vehicles linked to 3 new safety problems. It's GM's second massive recall in 2 months, following its recall of 1.6 million older model cars last month linked to ignition problems that led to dozens of deadly crashes dating back a decade. Now, GM said it will take a $300 million charge in the first quarter to cover the costs of the recalls. GM is currently under investigation by U.S. authorities for its slow reaction to the ignition defect, and the latest recall comes out of an internal probe. Staying in the U.S., scientists at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics say they have found, quote, echoes of the Big Bang 14 billion years ago. The detection of these gravitational waves was discovered at the South Pole with a telescope, they said, confirming a crucial connection between quantum mechanics and general relativity. The experts called the discovery one of the most important goals in cosmology today, and the gravitational waves were spotted by targeting the telescope to a specific area of the sky outside the galaxy known as the Southern Hole, where small fluctuations gave researchers new clues about conditions in the early universe.
And a good Tuesday morning to you all as we kick things off with some awards to be given out to some of the best athletes here in the nation. And best might be an understatement for some. 3 South Korean athletes, figure skater Kim Yeon-ah, speed skater Lee Sang-hwa, and short track skater Park Seung-hee will be receiving the Order of Sports Merit's Blue Dragon Award, the highest award given to an athlete here in the nation. While the award is given on a point system, Kim Yeon-ah was just short of the 1,500-point requirement, but the Ministry of Culture, Sports and Tourism decided to give her the honors due to the controversial finish in Sochi. And moving over to short track, where after An Hyun-soo, a.k.a. Viktor An, claimed 3 gold medals in Sochi, President Park Geun-hye made sure there was going to be an investigation to why An left Korea and joined Russia. And when the president gets involved, things are going to get serious. And on Monday, amid all the controversies involved with the South Korean short track team, the vice chief of the Korea Skating Union, Chung Myung-gyu, resigned from his post. Experts say that this comes after the poor showing by the men's short track team in Sochi and the previous incident which caused Viktor An to leave to Russia. Now, Chung was a former short track skater before coaching for 15 years. And now shifting over to the V-League, where the 2014 V-League Playoff Media Day took place on Monday, with 6 teams from the women's and men's team got together for a press conference. Of course, over on the women's side, with IBK Altos, Daejeon KGC, and GS Kartex heading over to the playoffs, the Altos will be waiting for the other teams in the finals. And with the Altos coming off of a championship win last season, many believe them to be the favorites this year as well, with Karina Casio leading the way. Meanwhile, over on the men's side, the Samsung Hwajae Blue Fangs look to claim their 7th straight championship. As many coaches agreed, Leo Martinez is unstoppable as the Hyundai Capital Skywalkers and the Korean Air Jumbo square off in the playoffs. And speaking of playoffs, let's shift over to Game 3 of the KBL's first round series between the Seoul SK Knights and the Goyang Orions. And going into the highlights here, first quarter of the game, the Orions looking sharp on the field, taking a 19-10 lead before heading into the halftime with a comfortable 41-28 lead. Second half, the Orions continue to dominate the SK Knights on the paint as Leon Williams leads the way with 17 points and 12 rebounds as the Orions force the series to Game 4 with an 81-64 win. And staying in basketball, but over in the United States, where the NCAA March Madness is set to begin, with the brackets all set for the 64 schools competing for the national championship. Now, 4 schools taking the #1 seed are University of Florida, University of Arizona, University of Virginia, and the undefeated Wichita State. Of course, as all fans know, the March Madness is all about upsets, as the round of 64 is set to begin from March 20th to March 21st, with the national championship scheduled for April 7th. And that's going to wrap it up for me. This has been SJ. Have a great rest of the day, and see you guys again for your sports needs.
While some regions might wake up to lingering rain from yesterday, which should gradually let up in the morning hours, and wake-up temperatures for this morning will be on the mild side, near or above 10 degrees Celsius. But the rain from yesterday dragged temperatures down by a few notches across the nation, but will still be above the seasonal averages. And we can expect to enjoy lots of sun compared to yesterday, but it seems like yellow dust season is here. The yellow dust will hit across the peninsula from this afternoon, and it might linger till tomorrow morning, so we have to be prepared for that. With that in mind, let's take a closer look at the readings for today. The morning low in Seoul starts out at 8, while Daegu, Gwangju, and Busan should wake up to mild morning at 13, 11, and 12 respectively. And afternoon highs in Seoul will rise to 14 degrees Celsius, which is about 4 degrees lower than yesterday, while Busan should get up to 19 later in the day. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like down on Jeju will climb up to 18, Daejeon will top out at 17, while the top temperature on Mount Kumgang will be at 6 this afternoon. While the roads are wet wet this morning, so please take extra caution while driving. Now that's all for Korea, and let's take a closer look at the readings for the around the world.
And those are the stories we have for you at this hour. Korea Today is coming up in about 30 minutes' time, and we'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.